those sorts of moments, I reflected, and it made me really value my health even more, because that is really the ultimate wealth, is your health and your time. I went from knowing absolutely nothing in this space to this opportunity where I'm hosting webinars, running podcasts, starting YouTube channels, and a lot of crazy stuff in this space, and just absolutely learning from the best. And for me, that was all about just simply stepping outside of my comfort zone, taking a step back and reflecting, and just really truly identifying what my why was. If you feel uncomfortable doing something that scares you, that's probably what you need to actually pursue even harder.
Problems are what? Problems are profits! Welcome to the Problems and Profits podcast with your hosts, Matt McKeever and Rebecca Lynn Matheson. And today we've got a special treat for you guys. So we're starting off season 2, but before we dive into season 2, I thought it would actually be useful and hopefully valuable for you guys if we actually jumped into our backstories first. So in today's episode, we're going to be jumping into Rebecca's backstory. And I hope to highlight for everyone, just by doing this, that everyone's got a Problems and Profits story. It's not, it is truly a universal truth, in my opinion. So it's really just a perspective. It's a mindset. It's a decision that each one of us can make. And so really excited to jump into Rebecca's backstory today. Hey, Rebecca.
Hey, Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. So where should we start in regards to your Problems and Profits story?
Absolutely. Well, I have told this story a couple of times, but it's certainly still one of my favorites. And it's the time when I went fishing and caught a bird. So this, for me, is definitely one of those problems or profits stories where it really changed my view on how I wanted to really go into the next stage of my life. And for me, I want to start the story off actually back a little bit further, and the beginning of the story that I'm going to tell here is actually going to start at the beginning of COVID, which for a lot of people, this was a big game changer. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and really dive deep into how I got where I am today and in this real estate investing space. So first of all, I was actually in the midst of refereeing rugby at a fairly high level here in Canada, traveling all over the country. I was literally in every single province, essentially refereeing all through the summers, and also had some international tours as a rugby referee. On top of that, I was really working full-time, managing and training at a gym here in London, Ontario. And that's just been a huge passion for me, is fitness and sport. And I went all the way from a position where I was actually about to fly to South Africa to leave to go to pursue a master's degree in sports science, which my background is in kinesiology. So it was a natural progression to pursue higher education and just continue to refine my skills. But in all honesty, I was going for rugby. So I actually went to South Africa for a month in 2019. And I spent a lot of time there just really at a referee academy, finalizing and really refining my skill set and mastering a lot of the negotiations on field, just the law in rugby, and just understanding the game a little bit more from a different perspective. And that really motivated me to pursue the sport even higher. And I certainly was on this trajectory, so excited to go to South Africa. And then all of a sudden, COVID hit and it shut down everything, including canceling my flight. I was a week away from flying out, and my plans just took an absolute turn. Now, right around this time, I actually had an opportunity as well to either pursue this pathway of South Africa or actually go into the fitness industry in a bigger way and help with opening up a second branch of the gym that I was working at. So I actually turned down that opportunity and decided that I wanted to go to South Africa. And then life happened and South Africa got canceled. So little beknownst to me, it was actually a good decision in the end, because I turned down an opportunity in an industry that got smashed during COVID. And I still continued to work in that industry all through the COVID-19 pandemic and the initial lockdown, but really spent the time looking back and reflecting. And I think these sorts of moments where you're faced with a big obstacle that completely changed the pathway and the big thing that you were working towards, it really is a moment where you have to reflect because you're not able to continue to pursue that thing. So I continued with fitness. I continued online coaching people while I couldn't coach them in person. And then all of this story really leads to a long weekend where I went away on a fishing trip with my dad. And for me, to give a little bit of context here, I completely respect my dad in all of the hard work that he has really done over the years. He's made a lot of sacrifices for the family and really supported everyone all through my childhood. So he worked actually as a millwright at a glass factory, and he was always the handyman, the mountain man. He is a hunter and a fisher, and he absolutely loves the outdoor space. So for me growing up, I always saw my dad working incredibly hard to provide for the family. But by no means were we well off. And my dad, he actually just turned 70 this past year. And so we were going on this fishing trip actually. And he had still not retired from his job at the age of 70. And so he actually did retire this past year, but on this fishing trip, he was still working at this job. And I saw this as the standard way of getting a job and providing for your family. It's what you're supposed to do. But he loves hunting and fishing. He would do that every day if he could. And going on this trip with my dad, we went up and down the river. He has this old yellow canoe, and every single morning we would wake up really early and we would take the canoe up and down the river with our fishing gear. And we were catching absolutely nothing, like getting no bites. But we kept trying. It was just fun spending time and bonding with my dad in that way. And, even though we weren't getting anything, we still decided after the one day we had some food over the fire, we went down and we actually cast off on the dock. And this 14-year-old kid, he comes down and he basically is showing us these photos of the fish that he caught earlier in the week. And it was huge. Like, we're like, okay, there's definitely fish in this water. Like, we're just not catching anything. So we kept trying different things. We were switching up our lures. And actually at one point I had this lure, it's called a jiggler. And what it does is when you cast off, it basically just like skims across the water and it looks like a little fish swimming. So that's what I started using. And I kept casting off, and my dad and I were just kind of chatting away, and I was reeling this back in so I could cast off again, and just kept trying. And eventually, after getting no bites, suddenly this bird out of absolutely nowhere just comes swooping down for my lure. So I'm yelling at this bird. My dad's beside me. We don't know what to do. And of course, because I'm reeling this lure back in, because I want to try and get it away from the bird sees it wiggling like a fish and it thinks that it's a fish. So it goes in harder. And all of a sudden, this bird it gets hooked, and it's hooked hard. So I'm reeling this thing in. The bird is squawking, trying to fly away. It did not expect the fish to bite back today, but it did. And this bird is just like trying to fly away. I'm meeting resistance, trying to reel this thing in. I don't know what to do. So my dad, he runs and he grabs a Swiss Army knife. He's at the ready. He's got all of the tools and he's prepped and ready to go, but we still don't know what to do with this bird. And of course, at this point in time, we've caused a commotion in this campsite. So we've got all of the other campers coming down to watch the scene. And then this guy next door at the campsite next to us, his name is Randy. And so he gets into the water, he grabs onto the bird, and still, I don't know what to do, but this bird is freaking out. Like, it's got its feet up in weird ways, trying to get this hook out of its mouth. And of course, in all of this commotion, it gets its foot caught on the other hook on this lure. So it's just like scrunched up in this weird way. And I have no idea how I'm going to get the hook out of its beak. But finally, after like this bird just kind of squirming, luckily the hook pops out of its mouth. So I'm like, okay, thank goodness. But now it's in its foot. So I have to continue to try and get this bird free. And so I have this bird's foot and I'm trying to get the hook out, but it is having none of it. It is just pecking my hand. I can't get anywhere near it. So Randy looks at me. He looks me dead in the eye. And it's just a moment of silence. And Randy says, as he reaches for the bird's neck, I'm going to regret this. And my stomach just drops. Like, for any Office fans out there, literally in my head, it's the moment where Toby comes back from vacation and Michael is just like, no, God, no, please, no. Office fans, make sure you comment below because it's one of my favorite shows. But literally that's going through my head. And then Randy, he sees my expression, my stomach sinks, and he's like, no, I'm just trying to secure the bird's neck so it stops biting you. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right. That's okay. So Randy, of course, secures the bird's neck. I'm able to actually work on its foot and get this hook out of the foot. And the bird flies away. But that was certainly the most unexpected thing on a fishing trip that I had ever experienced. And my dad still tells this story, and we both talk about it to this day. And for me, though, it was a serious reflection on the fact that I had been focusing a lot of my efforts on, frankly, things that I just found like it was really fun to go referee and travel the world. It was really fun to focus on fitness, and I gained a lot. My skills as a coach, being in the space that I was in, were developed so well because I had mentors surrounding me and I was able to work with clients and teach others, and I was able to use my expertise, but I wasn't taking care of my financial well-being or really focusing on that time with my family. And frankly, COVID was a blessing in disguise for me, where it allowed me to reflect on that. And this trip with my dad, it truly allowed me to take a step back and say, you know, as much as I totally respect the hustle and the drive of that typical pathway, I don't want that. Like, I want to be able to retire in my 30s. I want to have financial freedom. I want to be able to not have to stress over money like my parents have over the years. I want to be able to take control over that financial freedom. And for me, I was exposed to this concept, this mentality, actually through seeing some of the guys that were working out at the gym that I was at, Hybrid Fitness. Adam Martin, who brought in his whole crew, including yours truly, Matt McKeever, who's on this call, Jeff Wybo. We had the whole crew out at Hybrid Fitness. I brought them all into the gym. So I saw what they were doing from afar for some time. And finally, it made the connection that they were actually looking for someone to fill this role. And I went from knowing absolutely nothing in this space to this opportunity where I'm hosting webinars, running podcasts, starting YouTube channels, and a lot of crazy stuff in this space, and just absolutely learning from the best. And for me, that was all about just simply stepping outside of my comfort zone, taking a step back and reflecting, and just really truly identifying what my why was. And for me, my why truly was wanting to be financially independent and take control of my financial future, and seeing what my parents kind of went through in their upbringing, holding on to things and really going through financial turmoil, but maybe never changing up their situation. For me, I knew that I was going to take control of that. And that was the opportunity to just kind of step into a new industry where the sky is the limit. Like, there is no ceiling in this space. And so it was so cool to be able to really own in on those goals that I've had over the past year and a bit. to actually focus in. And the thing is like, when you are faced with a challenge like a global pandemic, many people can just hide away and, Netflix, Uber Eats, skip the dishes, just sit and do nothing. And I wasn't going to be that person. I knew that I wanted more. I knew that this was an opportunity to actually take on a new adventure and be able to take control of my life in a bigger way. So that is really my Problems or Profits story, is going from zero to actually just jumping in with 2 feet in the real estate investing space. And now I've started a company that specializes in cottage investing called the Cottage Buyers. So I've gone from absolutely zero with student debt to starting my own business during COVID. And it has just been an absolutely wicked fun ride. And it's been fun to do it with you as well, Matt. We started this podcast during the pandemic as well. And we've started a lot of cool shit. And I'm sure there will be a lot more to come. So that really is truly my favorite Problems or Profits story. I'm sure I have many, many other failures in my time, but this has certainly been one that I've been able to turn into, I think, a great success.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, Rebecca. And so for people at home that are listening to this, I guess any recommendations or any suggestions in regards to how they can go about turning that adversity into an opportunity for, certainly your story isn't unique to people in the sense that COVID turned your world upside down. There's a lot of people whose world has been turned upside down. And I'd love to just explore a little bit, how you decided that you were just going to take ownership of this situation. What really compelled you? Any pieces of advice for others?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it was just taking a step back. Like when you recognize and you have that feeling that things aren't quite going the way that you want anymore, whether it be something that you have failed on, whether it be some sort of external factor that has happened, like a global pandemic, it's important just to take a step back and say, am I going in the direction that I want to be going? Is this serving me? Is this serving my greater goals? And the answer was no. So I needed to recalibrate. And from that perspective, the thing that scares you the most is probably the thing that you need to do. And I have had many fantastic mentors through the years. And a lot of the times mentorship, it's not like a formal, hey, like, will you be my mentor? Like, you just don't go up to people asking that. Like, oftentimes it's just someone who is in a leadership role or somebody maybe that you work for or work with. For me, I've had mentorship even from one of my previous rugby coaches in university. She actually had her PhD in sports psychology, and she had some just fantastic words of wisdom for me that has resonated with me even still to this day. One of those things is certainly being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So definitely I grew up not necessarily learning how to save, learning how to invest, learning about all of these things that could yield financial rewards or build your wealth. I didn't learn how to do any of that growing up. So it kind of scared me. Like I was comfortable getting in debt, paying for education and going to university, but like all of that stuff scared me because I didn't know about it. It was an unknown thing to me. So even in sport, you have things that are uncomfortable, whether it be training, literally injuries after tackling on the field or whatever it might be. Those are things that might feel uncomfortable. But when you can step into that uncomfortable feeling and just own it, you are definitely in the realm of progress. And that, for me, I knew was where I needed to be because it felt uncomfortable. And that has just been such a guiding principle for sure, is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because frankly, like, you're going to be uncomfortable no matter what. Like sitting at home and watching Netflix and eating like pizza, like you're probably going to feel like shit afterwards. Like you might as well feel uncomfortable going for the goal, going for what you actually want in life, rather than just sitting around and feeling uncomfortable anyways. So for me, that's been such a guiding principle. Another one of my absolute favorite analogies actually came from a huge failure. So it was a huge build through the whole entire rugby season, and we had this really important playoff game, and it was down to the wire, but we lost. And so we had team debriefs the next day after we had a game every single week. So we would have a game on the Saturday. The next day we would go and we would do some recovery with our bodies, some ice baths, and then we would actually sit down and do game reviews. So we would all have to watch our game film, analyze our performance, and then we would have to share it. So we all got into the room and you could just feel it. Like, it felt uncomfortable. We all knew that we like didn't perform, and we were all like ready for the reckoning to come from the coach, and like we were all just sitting in the room. It was quiet, and our coach walked in, and you know, one of the things that she said was, "This is shitty. Like, this feels like shit. It is shit, and we have to acknowledge that. But the thing about shit is that when it sits in the toilet for too long, it's going to stink up the room. So we still have to address that it's shit, but then we have to flush it down the toilet and move on." And that's also been such an important thing for overcoming failures in my life as well, or overcoming tough times. Like, yeah, it's shitty. Like, acknowledge the shit. Don't just let the shit sit in the room, because it's going to continue to smell. Like, you have to acknowledge the shit, but then flush it down the fucking toilet and move forward. And that's been another fantastic, just super visual, super real comment that you can feel in those moments. And so those are some of the things that I would say, if you feel uncomfortable doing something that scares you, that's probably what you need to actually pursue even harder. So whether that be your physical fitness, whether that be your financial well-being, whether that be taking on a new business venture, whether that be like the thing that you've always wanted to do, but we're always a bit too afraid to do, like, do that fucking thing. Like, that is exactly what you need to do if it scares you, because the things that are meaningful are often the scariest.
Awesome. Yeah, 100% agree. I've never heard that analogy or story before, but I think it's very effective and is really easy for people to quickly understand that, yeah, there's going to be moments where you're going to have to move on from it, and simply getting it over with sooner than later. I think far too often people add time to problems when in fact adding time rarely solves anything.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And yeah, from that perspective, to build on that point, like, compressing time has been one of the biggest things that I've actually learned from you, Matt, is being able to optimize your day, being able to optimize the amount of time that you spend on a problem. It really helps you accelerate, because I for sure am a procrastinator. Like, my PI as a maverick, like, I like to move fast and break things, but I also like to chill until I have to do the thing, and then I do it. And that's how I went through university too. I've got a deadline. Okay, I'm going to wait until the deadline to do the thing. But what that has allowed me to do is actually work really well under pressure. I am super good at, when I do set a deadline, working really well under pressure. So compressing the time for me means setting actual realistic, timely goals, and then doing everything in my power to actually work towards that thing when I set that deadline. So for me, I love the idea of compressing time and actually saying, hey, listen, we've got some crazy goal and we're going to do it in this time frame. Okay, cool. What do we need to do to solve that problem to get there? And then you actually start thinking of not what you want to accomplish, but how. Like, when you start asking those how questions and really optimizing your time, I think that is such an important skill set in business and in this kind of problems and profits mentality as well.
100%. Really well said. Appreciate it, Rebecca. And before we wrap up here on your story, I thought it would only be right if we circled back to the 3 core questions that we ask all of our guests. So, first question, what's the most expensive thing you've ever broken?
Ooh, yes. Most expensive thing I have ever broken, I would actually say is my head. And to be more specific, I actually, when I was in university, had 3 concussions in 1 calendar year. So that was a very avoidable thing for the second 2, I would say. But the first one, in a high contact sport, it happens. And I was concussed. I actually was in a very big national championship when I got concussed and still ended up playing the next game. So it just made it worse. But then I came back to sport too soon. I got reconcussed in that same calendar year. And that took me away from a lot of the things that I loved to do. So for me, I think that, no object, no thing that you can buy is even of the same worth to me than like that injury. That was so significant to me. And that's definitely the most expensive thing that I've ever broken, because without that mental capacity to be in a room and not be able to really like process things properly because the stimulus was too much, like those sorts of moments, I reflected, and it made me really value my health even more, because that is really the ultimate wealth, is your health and your time.
Yeah, absolutely. So question number 2, $1 million in 24 hours. What would you do?
That's a fantastic question. Okay, so $1 million and only 24 hours. I certainly would buy a Jeep, because that is just something that I have wanted to buy for a little while, but it's on my list. And so I would buy a Jeep. That is one of my dream cars, Jeep Wrangler. And then I would also probably try and buy some sort of like high level experience, such as like a chat with Gary Vee for a day. I don't know if $1 million would get me that, but that would be pretty epic. And just actually, I as much as like I mentioned a thing that I wanted to purchase that like it would enjoy, I actually value experiences a lot more. So I would definitely seek out experiences such as like Gary Vee, or I would take that Jeep and drive across Canada, or I would take that and actually go travel somewhere in the world with a bunch of friends and just have a really epic day.
Nice. Awesome. And then finally, question number 3, why are you you?
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of my favorite questions that we ask all of our guests, but I would say I'm me. I am a freckle-faced hustler, redheaded, and I certainly just embody that. And I am a reflection of definitely my upbringing, but also just the situations and choices that I've made. So by opting into taking things on 100% when I do them, or by opting into failing forward, like that is all accumulation of my experiences that ultimately shape my perspective, and my perspective leads to my decisions and my thoughts, etc. So I am me because of the decisions that I've made and the people who I choose to surround myself by.
Awesome. Yeah, great answer.
All right. Well, Matt, thanks for starting this season off right, and I appreciate this podcast. So guys, I really hope that you tune into all of our season 2 of the Proms or Profits podcast. Here we've got some fantastic guests upcoming, and we will also be having Matt give a bit of his backstory too. So he's going to be breaking down kind of his perspective, where he's come from, and we are going to have some special episodes as well for you in this second season. So make sure you stay tuned for more. And it's been so fun just sharing a little bit of my backstory. So hopefully that gives you some context as to where I'm coming from, my perspective, and also encourages you guys to go out there and just start some shit. Like I really want you to just feel empowered. And hopefully by sharing my story, my journey from 0 to 1, you guys can be inspired to take on your own adventures and challenges.